The other thing is that we have, there's particular dimensions and metrics that have these repeated values. So if you have like a numeric index, so something, for example, we have custom dimensions and metrics, you'll notice they have these double X's as part of the ID. And what that means is that there's a particular range for that dimension or metric. So we provide these attributes that give you the boundary or the range that is valid for this particular dimension or metric. And this helps you understand either for validation purposes or if you want to build out a list of dimensions and metrics that are valid for a particular repeated value, this will provide the values that you need to know for that. And then finally, we have some attributes that you can think of as helping in terms of validation. So we have an allowed in segments attribute, and this just helps you identify whether a particular dimension or metric can be used in a reporting query as a segment. And if it is allowed, then this attribute will exist. If not, it will not exist. And again, this is helpful for validation and making sure you're building queries out that will work properly. So it's a whole bunch of great stuff in terms of the data that we provide. It gives you, I think, pretty much like a good coverage on all the stuff you're going to need to build an API, right? The final thing we want to talk about here in terms of attributes is this e-tag value. So you'll notice when you make a request to the metadata API, you'll get a response back, and there'll be an e-tag attribute. And what this is a unique identifier that you can use to determine whether the response has changed since the last time that you requested it. So if you make the response and you cache that client side or server side, and then you make another request later on, if that value matches the value you have stored, the e-tag value, that means the response has not changed. And this is helpful for a few reasons. One is if you've maybe got a response and build out a UI, you can use the e-tag to determine if you need to update that UI. Because if the value hasn't changed, there's no point in updating your UI because nothing's changed since the last time you requested it. The other way you can use it is when you make a request to the Google Analytics servers, to the metadata API, you can actually include this e-tag value as part of the headers. And then the response you get back will depend on whether the value you provided is the same as what's already exists on the server or it doesn't. So if you send the e-tag value and it's the same, we'll respond back with a 304 response, which is a not modified response. And then you'll know that there's no changes. If you provide the value and it responds back with a 200, then you'll actually get a new response. That means there's a new response, and you have to update what you have on your server side or your client side. So it's really helpful saving quota. And this is really probably useful for mobile because you don't want to be sending a lot of data back and forth on mobile. And actually, when you make the request to the metadata API, you can specify a fields parameter and specify just to request the e-tag value if you'd like. So it's really useful for caching and making sure efficient use of the API and quota. So let's talk a little bit about the data deprecation policy. This is new, right? What we introduced.
So one of the things that we're introducing with the metadata API is a new data deprecation policy. And this covers how we add and change data within Google Analytics reporting APIs. So when we add new data, we'll announce it through the changelog, and then the data will automatically appear through the metadata API. So if you're actually building any products using this API, they'll automatically be updated, which is fantastic. The second thing is when we decide to remove data. In the past, it was we would announce it, but there was nothing formal. So today we're formalizing it with this API. When we announce a deprecation of data, what we'll do is we'll actually message the changelogs, and then it'll be available for a minimum of 6 months, after which we'll remove it. And what we're doing is to message user interfaces to keep them updated, where it's actually a new status parameter that we'll set to deprecated. By default, it's public. And so once it's deprecated, you can actually update your interfaces to start changing them. And then finally, in the cases where we want to replace, sometimes we'll rename a different dimension and metric. This will also go through deprecation, where we'll announce the change on the changelog. The data will be available the old name will be available for a minimum of 6 months. But we'll also introduce a brand new parameter that's called the replace by parameter. And that actually returns an ID that points to a different entity that's the replacement, a different dimension or metric that's the replacement for the one that's being deprecated. So what's great about it is now with the metadata API, for products that have integrated with it, they completely can be compliant with all our deprecation policies without having to push new releases to production. So let's take a look at some of these attributes.
Yeah, see how actually how it manifests in the actual response. So you'll see that there's a few different attributes here, as Nick mentioned, which was the status. So when this gets deprecated, this will change from public to deprecated. And you should always be checking for this value to make sure that the dimensions and metrics you're using are still valid and can be used in a query. And if it does change to deprecated, then you want to be checking to see if it's been replaced maybe by a different ID. And if that's the case, then we'll also include this replaced by attribute, which then points to the ID of the obviously dimensional metric that's replacing this particular one. Right?
Yeah, and I think the good thing about this is that if many people will build saved reports within their products and interfaces. So if you do see something that's deprecated, you will want to make sure you go back and update or warn your users that either the queries will stop working in the future, or just go ahead and update them with the replace by, so that way they don't see any disruption of service.
Yeah, and if you don't do this, ultimately at some point it'll be removed, and you'll get a bad request response back.
Yeah, and it'll be a bad user experience as well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. So we covered a lot, but it's a very simple but powerful API, I think. So this is, it's really easy to use. And it is really powerful in terms of what you can do in the UI and things like that. But we do have a lot of resources available if you'd like to learn more about this API and how to use it. We provide some code snippets and examples on our developer site as per usual. And again, if you're going to use it, register in the APIs console and get an API key that you can throw together. And then we have a new data deprecation policy that we encourage you to read and review. So if you're building applications, you understand how things will be changing in the future. But that's it for today. We wanted to keep it short and simple, and we want to thank you for joining us again, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.
Yep.